Hey everyone, this is Mrs. Mallard. This is Unit 1, Lesson 3, the second part of connective tissues. So just like we did yesterday, we're going to be going through the different categories of connective tissues. We're going to talk about how to identify what they look like underneath the microscope, and also we're going to talk about where these particular tissues are found at in the body. So just as a reminder, we are still focusing on connective. So that's the second type of tissue. We've already learned about epithelial. So we are continuing with connective. And yesterday we talked about connective tissue proper. We went over loose versus dense connective tissue. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the connective tissues on the right-hand side, which is cartilage, the different types of cartilage listed there, bone, and blood. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is the different types of cartilage in the body as well as bone and blood. All right, so most of you probably know where at in the body that we find cartilage. Most students know that cartilage makes up your nose and your ear. We also have some other parts that you might not realize, but cartilage at the ends of the bones in the rib cage. And then there's cartilage in your throat, and we'll talk about that one in a moment. But you all know, probably have learned about from other classes that cartilage is flexible. I did want to point out that cartilage is avascular. So remember, vascular means it gets a really good blood supply. So there's blood flow to that particular. Avascular means that it is not vascular. So cartilage does not get a good blood flow to it, which means that if you have damage to your cartilage, it does take some time to heal up because cartilage doesn't naturally have a good blood supply or blood flow to it. There are three different types of cartilage that we're going to go through: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. So we're going to look at these three different cartilages, see what they look like underneath the microscope and where we find them in the body. So our first one, which is hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage, its function is to provide firm support, but it can also resist some compressive stress. So if it's pressed on, it can resist some of that stress. Later in the semester, we're going to talk about the formation of the skeleton, and we'll talk about how in development, the embryonic skeleton is completely made out of hyaline cartilage. All right, so we'll talk about that when we get to bone development later in the semester. Your nose is made out of hyaline cartilage. Your trachea has rings of cartilage. So if you look here, if you're not sure where your trachea is, your trachea leads down to the bronchi, which branch out into your lungs. But the trachea has these rings of cartilage, and what the cartilage does is it allows to basically it keeps the trachea from collapsing, so it keeps the trachea open. Obviously, you want to keep the trachea open because that's where the airflow is going to come down in order to get to your lungs. The ends of your long bones are covered on the ends with hyaline cartilage. If you've ever eaten like a drumstick, you're eating chicken drumstick, you might have seen a white shiny material at the end of the bone, or if you've eaten chicken wings, there's like a white shiny material at the end of the bones. It's very smooth. That is hyaline cartilage. And then another place where we find this particular cartilage is in the costal cartilage, which is there's cartilage at the end of your ribs. All right, so these are different places. Now, hyaline cartilage, this is what it looks like underneath the microscope. So first thing you'll notice is that there's these things that look like little eyes, these little circles with these little darker circles inside. They kind of look like eyes. These are chondrocytes. These are cells that actually make the cartilage material. So first of all, when you're looking at your microscope slides, if you see any of these little chondrocytes, these little things that look like little eyeballs staring back at you, that tells you that this is a type of cartilage. Now, hyaline cartilage, when you look at it underneath the microscope, the background, kind of this light purple that you see is going to look clear. All right. So clear meaning that it doesn't look fuzzy in the background. There's no fibers in it. It's just kind of a smooth, clear background. Okay. That indicates that it's hyaline cartilage. The next type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. So this type of cartilage is going to have what are called elastic fibers. So there's fibers that make up this cartilage that provide some more flexibility. So the outer ear, the outer ear, for example, is going to be made out of this cartilage, and so you all know that you can really fold and bend your ear. And there are, if you look at the microscopic picture of the cartilage, you'll see, once again, you've got these little structures that look like eyeballs staring back at you. But if you notice in the background, there are these fibers. And so these little fibers, they kind of look like little hairs. These are the elastic fibers. And so that's why it's called the elastic cartilage. One other place that you'll find this elastic cartilage is this structure called the epiglottis. And so I put this picture up here because some of you might not know where the epiglottis is, but it's a little cartilage flap. And you'll notice that when you swallow food, you've got kind of two different tubes that your food can go down. One is the esophagus, which is going to lead straight to the stomach, and that's obviously where you want your food to go. But there's also another opening, and this is your trachea, and remember your trachea is going to lead down into your lungs. So when you swallow food, you want to make sure that the food is going down the right tube. You want to make sure it's going down the esophagus and not the trachea. So your body has this little flap called the epiglottis, which is going to cover the trachea, and that's going to prevent any food from going down into your trachea, because you don't want food or water going down in through your trachea to your lungs. So you've got the epiglottis there to make sure that that doesn't happen. Those of you might have experienced where you've eaten something, or you've had something to drink and it's gone down gone down the wrong pipe, so to speak, and you'll just start coughing like crazy because that's your body's way of kind of making sure that that trachea stays clear. So that's what the epiglottis is. It's made out of that elastic cartilage. All right, this is our last one, fibrocartilage. Once again, when you look at these microscopic images underneath the microscope, you're going to be looking for the things that look like eyeballs. Notice that this also kind of has like a fuzzy background. If you notice, it looks more like fibers, like lines, versus the elastic cartilage where it looks like hair that was going all over the place. That's sort of your way to distinguish between fibro and elastic cartilage. So hyaline cartilage doesn't really have anything in the background. Elastic has hairs going everywhere. And then fibro, the fibers are going to be usually going to be kind of going in one direction. We find fibrocartilage in areas that need to absorb shock. So the biggest part of your body that absorbs a shock in your body are the discs between your vertebrae. So this is like your backbone here, and you have these discs in between each vertebrae. And so if you're jumping up and down, these discs are going to help to absorb shock. Obviously, your knee joints are another place that's going to absorb a lot of shock, and so you've got fibrocartilage in your knee joints. One of the ones I also like to mention is that in your pelvis, you've got a joint, the pubic symphysis. There's a little joint kind of right there held to, and there's like a piece of cartilage right there. I point that out because in women, during pregnancy, your body releases a lot of hormones. And one of the things the hormone does is it loosens up joints. All the joints in your body tend to be more loose when you're pregnant because of hormones. Sometimes women will find that their feet, you might go like a half shoe size up because the joints in your feet will relax because of those hormones. But specifically in this part of the body, you want that joint to kind of loosen up because the baby's head actually has to fit through that opening in the pelvis. And so you want that joint down there to be loose, to allow for that head to be able to fit through the pelvis there during childbirth. All right, we've finished our cartilages. So we have hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. We are going to move on to our next category of connective tissue, which is bone. Of course, you all are familiar with bone. This is what it looks like underneath the microscope. Sometimes students say that bone looks like tree rings underneath the microscope. I've had some students that said that they look like the wings, or the pattern that you would see like on moth wings, with the eye spots. So any way that helps you to remember that this is bone works. Bone is where blood cells are going to form, and blood is a vascular tissue. So this means that bone has a good blood supply to it. So this is the reason why if you break a bone, it'll probably take about 6 weeks to heal. If you tear a ligament, remember ligaments are not vascularized, they're avascular, it's going to take more like 6 months to heal. Okay, so that vascularization has a huge impact on how quickly a particular tissue is going to heal if it's damaged. So you break a bone, you might be looking at 6 weeks for it to heal up. You tear a ligament, which is avascular, you're looking at maybe 6 to 8 months um, of recovery and healing time. All right, our last one, blood. This is always kind of a strange one, because this is the one that seems completely out of place, because it does not provide any sort of like mechanical support, like cartilage or bone. It doesn't really provide any support. The reason why blood is considered a connective tissue is because it derives from the same embryonic tissue as all of the others. So that's one of the reasons why blood is considered a connective tissue, because all the connective tissues we talked about and blood arise from the same embryonic tissue during development. That's one of the reasons. The other thing is that with connective tissues, you have cells that are embedded in what's called a non-living matrix. So in this scenario, blood, we have red blood cells. That's our cell part. The quote unquote matrix part, the non-living part, is the plasma. So blood is suspended in plasma. And because of those three things, because they come from the same embryonic tissue, and because we have cells suspended in this matrix called the plasma, that's why blood's considered a connective tissue. I know it's like the oddball out of all of them. We're not going to spend a ton of time on blood, because when we do the circulatory system, we'll get into more detail. We'll talk about red blood cells, we'll talk about white blood cells, and we'll talk about the plasma and the platelets, and how the red blood cells deliver oxygen to the body, and the fact that white blood cells are part of the immune system. So we're going to spend a ton more time on blood cells when we get to the circulatory system. But just know that blood is a type of a type of connective tissue. All right, let's just kind of go back here and review real quick. We learned about the 3 different types of cartilage: hyaline, elastic, and fibro. So you should be able to tell me where these are located at in the body and be able to identify pictures. We talked about bone being a vascular tissue, which is very different from our tendons and ligaments, which are avascular. And we also talked about blood being our last type of connective tissue. So make sure that you know where these connective tissues are at in the body. And also you need to be able to identify pictures of them, what they look like underneath the microscope.